Dear ones, you know what time it is. Time to discuss some weird things about the Balaam tradition, both within the Bible and also in a strange and enigmatic text outside the Bible. Very rare reference to a biblical character, potentially at least, which we will get to. Here's my teaser. Okay, first, problem number one. There's something strange about the Balaam narratives in the Hebrew Bible. And I'm talking about the Balaam, of course, who appears famously in the book of Numbers, talks to a talking donkey, hits the donkey, and is reprimanded by an angel for hitting the donkey. That Balaam. The strange thing is that the main narrative about Balaam, the main story, the kind of famous story, the Sunday school sermon story about Balaam, occurs in Numbers chapters 22 through 24. It is part prose and it is part poetry. The poetry, in fact, some have speculated might even be some of the older poetry in the Hebrew Bible as a whole. It has a very archaic kind of feel to it, and maybe that was just something that was affected by the narrator, or maybe it really is genuine to some very old source there. Who knows? So there's that. That's fine. However, it seems like almost, not every, but almost every other reference to Balaam that we have in the Bible, including in the Old Testament, but also the New Testament, seems maybe at most extreme to be talking about a different Balaam, or maybe like a story of the same Balaam, but like with a different upshot, or with a Balaam who does different things. What do I mean by this? Well, in Numbers chapters 22 through 24, the mainstream, the longest Balaam narrative that we have, this character who's called Balaam, son of Beor in Pethor, which is by the Euphrates, is drafted by a certain king, a Moabite king, who's worried about the Israelites. They're in the wilderness at this point. They have escaped from Egypt. They're wandering around the wilderness. They have not yet gotten into their promised land. They're east of the Jordan River, and they want to get in, but they can't quite get in. So this Moabite king, very worried about them being there, hires Balaam, who is some kind of, and here's where the terminology could change, he's called a seer, one S-E-E-R, one who sees. So some of the biblical prophets are called seers as well, Jose in Hebrew. But he could also be something like a prophet. He could also be seen as something like a sorcerer, or some word that would have like a negative connotation in the biblical terminology too, especially for the negative portrayals of Balaam, which we'll get to in a minute, which come after, at least canonically after, the positive portrayal. Okay, so Balaam, the seer, the prophet type figure, he is taken up to a hill and he is supposed to curse the Israelites. But he's already told this king, he's like, look, I'm not going to, I will ask God. I will politely ask God what I should do. And if God says, do not curse them, I will not curse them. I can only do what I'm commanded. So Balak, this other king, is like, yeah, curse them, ready, go. And Balaam does not. Instead, he speaks words of blessing, long poems of blessing down on Israel in these chapters, to the great consternation of the king. He's said to be one who sees the visions of the Almighty. This is 24:4. The Hebrew term there is Shaddai, a very particular kind of term, not super rare, not exactly limited to this passage, but very distinctive. And he talks about how beautiful Israel is and how great everything is. And this other king's like, try to curse them again. And so he's like, okay. And he does speak again, but he does not curse. He begins his oracle saying, the oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is clear, or eye is opened in Hebrew. The oracle of one who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, Elyon in Hebrew, who sees the vision of the Almighty, Shaddai, who falls down but with his eyes uncovered. Who knows what that means? And then he goes on to not curse Israel. Okay. So there's that Balaam. There's that Balaam who does that. But there are some strange things in the story, especially before all this. Like for instance, in chapter 22, God appears to Balaam and instructs him not to curse the people, and tells him not even to go back with the Moabites at all. But the Moabites ask him, come back with us. And God actually gives Balaam permission to accompany the Moabites back to Moab. This is in 22:20. That night God came to Balaam and said to him, if the men have come to summon you, get up and go with them, but only do what I tell you to do. Okay. However, when Balaam does get up to leave, in the very next verse, God is angry with him for leaving, and sends an angel or a messenger in the way as the Satan, adversary, there a reference to a Satan-like figure, an oppositional figure sent by God. And this is where Balaam ends up beating the donkey, who sees the angel, and so on. Then the angel tells Balaam that he may actually continue on the mission. So what's all this like nonsense about telling him he can go, then getting mad at him, then sending the angel, then the talking donkey, then the blocking, then the angel tells him he can go, then he is told to curse, then he doesn't curse. Okay. So already we have potentially some, I don't know, just like some literary narrative ambiguity within the story. Do we have here, Hebrew Bible scholar moment, you can see it coming if you're familiar with the way Old Testament scholarship works at all. Do we have here multiple sources? Do we have a source which is like, explaining the account in some way, the kind of positive stories about Balaam doing what God says, juxtaposed in the same narrative with another source basically presenting us with a Balaam who's doing the wrong thing? So this kind of interplay between, is Balaam doing the right thing or is he doing the wrong thing? This is the kind of story that we're tracking here. Okay, so I said that this main narrative here, which I've taken 6 minutes just setting up, is sort of like different from the other ways that Balaam is described. Yes, I mean right away already in the book of Numbers, right afterward, in Numbers chapter 25, we have this story of terrible sin that Israel sins, promiscuity and cavorting with foreign women right after the Balaam episode. But Balaam isn't really said to be involved in this. But however, in Numbers chapter 31, when Israel's doing some fighting, some war, they're supposed to kill everyone. They don't kill the women, however. And in 31:15, Moses says to them, have you allowed all the women to live? These women here, on Balaam's advice, made the Israelites act treacherously against the Lord in the affair of Peor. This is Numbers chapter 25, this act of promiscuity, which Phinehas, this one who's very zealous for the Lord, he solves by killing a bunch of people. So act of violence, God is happy about it in that passage. On Balaam's advice made them sin, something not mentioned in that text at all. So do we have like a different tradition or a different source? Why not mention something so prominent like that if Balaam had been a prominent character, as opposed to just chapters later when we've now just like forgotten about Balaam? Now Moses is like, yeah, Balaam, he was just like, he was enticing the Israelites to act treacherously against the Lord at Peor. And you can also read Psalm 106, which has reference to this same event, which references child sacrifice and all kinds of other things associated with this. Okay. So there's that. There's also Deuteronomy 23. In Deuteronomy 23, and I'll summarize, you can go and read Deuteronomy 23 yourself. I'll put the passage down in the video description so you can just read it there. 23, 3 through 6 in particular, Moses speaking, Moses is telling the people that the Ammonites and the Moabites in particular are excluded from the assembly of the Lord in Israel because, and I quote here, because they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor to curse you. But the Lord, your God, refused to heed Balaam. So it made it seem like Balaam was trying to curse Israel, but God kind of turned it around, which is not really what the narrative says in Numbers. I guess you could sort of like merge those two accounts together if you wanted to. It's a little tension there. Again, in Joshua 13, we have kind of a repeat of the Deuteronomy thing, where the Lord claims that he refused to listen to Balaam, as if Balaam was anything but obedient to the Lord in Numbers 22 through 24. Micah 6:5 says, my people, remember when Balak, king of Moab, plotted against you, and how Balaam, son of Beor, responded to him? But then it's unclear how Micah thinks Balaam responded to him. Nehemiah 13 repeats the Deuteronomy story, and so on. However, by the time we get to the New Testament, the image of the negative Balaam, the Balaam who enticed Israel to sin, who was a sorcerer, who tried to curse Israel, all this kind of stuff that Numbers 22 to 24 does not say at all that he did, has fully taken hold. And many have pointed out, I'm not just making this up. There's people have studied this issue in Second Temple Judaism and early Judaism preceding the writing of the New Testament. The character of Balaam had taken on in Jewish sources a decidedly negative character. He was a sorcerer. He did bad things. He was a bad influence. So by the time we get to the New Testament, then you see this reflection. 2 Peter chapter 2. They have left the straight road and gone astray, following the road of Balaam, who loved the wages of doing wrong, but was rebuked for his own transgression. A speechless donkey spoke with a human voice and restrained the prophet's madness. Okay. I mean, yeah, that's true. That part is true, but it's like, how do you, within the narrative there, as I described earlier, it's back and forth. Jude verse 11. Woe to them, for they go the way of Cain and abandon themselves to Balaam's error for the sake of gain. And in the book of Revelation, but I have a few things against you, one of these letters to the churches. You have some there who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. So there's that Numbers 25 reference. So the fornication, the incident there that occurred. Okay. So maybe some tension there. So what do we learn about the Bible? What do we learn from a Christian theological perspective about constructing a theology of Scripture? I think we learn here that we're dealing with a tradition, and different authors might have actually drawn on different aspects of this Balaam tradition to make different points at different times. And it's not just narrated all very neatly, clearly, in the text of Numbers itself. So I think very simple advice here. You got to give the Bible a little room to breathe, a little room to speak in different ways in this tradition, for certain authors to have certain parts of this tradition. And it can't all just be harmonized. I mean, you can do this harmonizing work if you want, for sure. But you have to be careful that in trying to do good, you do not lie. You know what I mean? Like, this is like kindergarten ethics 101. Two wrongs don't make a right, If you choose the lesser of two evils, you're still choosing evil. And then you end up, calling what you once called evil, which was supposed to be better, you end up calling that good, because nobody wants to, say, well, I chose the lesser of two evils and so I'm evil, but it's, no, you want to say it's right and it's wrong and I'm right. Okay, so just be careful with that kind of reasoning. I'm suggesting that this kind of harmonizing reasoning can sometimes get into this kind of thing where a person starts making dishonest moves to try to uphold some greater thing. And it's like, in my experience, you get kind of morally lost, spiritually lost, and in our theology of Scripture construction, interpretively lost when doing those kinds of moves. So I warn against them. That's my advice. You're watching this video, so here I am. I'm telling you what I think. I would say don't do that. Just kind of revel in the tradition. Revel in the difference. Hear it. Read it. Maybe you've never even thought of these texts this way. Now, in the last minute or two here, I introduce an interesting thing. There's an inscription outside of the Bible. It's one of the earlier inscriptions of its type, really, that mentions a biblical character. It's so fascinating. There's not a lot of material like this. So when you have something like this, you really got to get into it. It is a plaster text from a place called Deir Alla. It's on the east side of the Jordan River, exactly where in the Bible the Israelites are said, roughly, let's say, the region where the Israelites are said to have encountered Balaam in that story in Numbers 22. The inscription apparently was written in ink on the wall of some kind of temple, which was destroyed in an earthquake. So it all fell to the ground, but parts of this plaster were still intact, and archaeologists could recover them from the ground when this was discovered in 1967. Apparently, this building had fallen apart during an earthquake, maybe sometime in the 800s, but maybe more likely the 700s BCE. This inscription is fragmentary. Can you see here in the picture? So you have combinations. It's not even clear where this part should be put. Should it be here? Should it be here? You can reconstruct the things in the middle. There actually are different colored inks. So there's red ink, but there's also black ink. Is there a reason for the red ink and then the black ink? Does it mean something? These are all things that scholars and archaeologists try to reconstruct, and I'll put some sources down below and you can follow this trail. What does this Balaam inscription say? And what bearing does it have on the Bible? And where can you even read this? I'll put a link to it down below. You can read it on the internet. But if you want a scholarly source, something like this, Writings from the Ancient World series is really great. From the Society of Biblical Literature, these publications, they kind of give you a nice readable format. This one's called Prophets and Prophecy in the Ancient Near East. Different translators here. Leong Xiao, fantastic scholar. of Hebrew and cognate languages is the translator here. I also have on my shelf a gift from one of my teachers, Joanne Hackett, somewhat recently retired from UT Austin, but was at Harvard when I was there. She did her dissertation on the Balaam text from Deir Alla, and this was her dissertation. It's kind of funny to look at these old dissertations. Like, you can see the font, it's like typewriter font, you know? Maybe not interesting to anybody. I don't know, I kind of like it. It just gives it kind of like an old-fashioned published dissertation-like feel. So this is a good translation too, but I'll read from Liang Seao's translation here just because it's more recent. What does this Balaam inscription say? It begins like this: the warning of the book of Balaam, son of Beor, who was a seer of the gods. A seer of the gods. Okay. You know, and it's using that term, that just like the Hebrew term, Jose. The language of this inscription, by the way, some think it's Aramaic. It might actually be some kind of Canaanite dialect of some kind with some Aramaic features, so something to be debated. But he is a seer of the Elohim, or of the Elohim with an N on the end with that Aramaic type feature here, which is exactly how he's described in the Bible. So, you know, this seems like it's got to be the same Balaam, right? Same region, same kind of title and epithet, a seer of the gods. The gods came to him at night and spoke to him, according to the oracle of El. They said to Balaam, son of Beor, thus will, you know, and there's a lot of gaps. There are a lot of gaps in this inscription. Thus will someone do hereafter. No one has seen something. When Balaam arose on the morrow, his hand was slack. His right hand hung low. He fasted continually in his chamber. He could not sleep and he wept continually. So whatever they told him was very disturbing. Then his people came up to him and said to Balaam, son of Beor, why do you fast and why do you weep? He said to them, sit down and I shall tell you what the Shaddaiin have done. Notice that term, Shaddaiin, kind of sounds like Shaddai, right? So that reference to Shaddai there in the poetry of Numbers, and then this reference to his vision of the Shaddaiin, you know, another connection there between the two texts. Come see the acts of the gods, Balaam says. The gods gathered together. The Shaddaiin took their places in the assembly. So you have this idea of a divine assembly. The gods are kind of gathering. There's maybe some god like El who's in charge of this, watching. And they said to the blank, may you break the bolts of heaven with your rain cloud, bringing about darkness and not light, eeriness and not brightness. May you bring terror through the dark rain cloud. So they, you know, and then they describe like animals kind of going crazy. The eagle and the voice of the vulture resounds. The young of some kind of bird, the one rips the young of cormorants. The swallow mangles the dove and the sparrow. So birds are like eating each other, attacking each other. Instead of ewes, it is the rod that is led. The hares eat the something. Somebody is filled with beer and drunk with wine. Hyenas heed instruction. The whelps of the fox do something. Okay, so animals are going crazy. Foxes and birds and hares eating each other. There's some kind of world turned upside down apocalyptic theme going on here. And Balaam is reporting this to the people. And then the rest of the inscription, as you can see if you read it, is very, very fragmentary. So like I said, there are very few things like this. Does this prove that Balaam was a real historical character and that everything in the Bible everything about Balaam is historically accurate? No, the inscription does not prove that. It does prove, though, from a very early date, not in the Bible, that this character Balaam was a known character. He was a seer. He was a prophet of some kind. He dealt with Shaddai or the Shaddaiin, and that this tradition was live and that this was a known figure. Whether one then pursues that from at whatever historical level, like, well, biblical authors used this local tradition, or whether both of these kinds of sources were drawing from the same tradition, would be something that you'd have to study and figure out. But I think it's pretty amazing that this plaster Deir Alla text, pretty amazing that it even exists.